Welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. I am with the man, the myth, the legend, Greg Foss. He is one of the macro heavyweights on Twitter. I'm always looking at James, Greg, Lawrence, and they're always in the know with the macro stuff. And I asked him, I was like, you got to come on the show and we're going to talk a little bit about it. I'm going to use the same type of strategy that I did with Lawrence, and it looked like a lot of you guys appreciated it. I'm going to take it from, from a Bitcoiner's perspective, and I'm going to ask Greg to explain a lot of things that, perhaps us that are just Bitcoiners don't quite understand how a lot of the legacy system works. And I think Greg is perfect to have a conversation about that. So Greg, welcome to the show. How you doing?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm doing all right. Everything considered, this world is a little scary right now. So happy to try and share some viewpoints from a guy that's made 35 years of mistakes. All right. That's all I bring to the table. Let's be clear about that. 35 years of mistakes, but I've never let a mistake kill me. And then what you do is you let your winners ride, and the winners make up for controlling your losers, right? If anyone thinks they make 100% decisions correctly, that's not how life works. It's all about controlling your mistakes. And anyway, looking forward to trying to impart some experience if that helps. Let's do it.
Yeah, one of the things I like about mistakes, right, is that they show you what not to do. So like after a long period of time, you start to, I guess you get the wisdom of, if you find yourself in a particular situation, you're like, let me not do that because I know what the outcome of doing that decision is. And I guess that's from my perspective. But Greg, I'm going to jump right into it. This is one of the tweets that you posted today. It's very similar to what Lawrence was saying last week, right? I'm going to read it, and I think it gives great context to the questions I want to ask you about. It says, we no longer have an inflation crisis. That cat is out of the bag. Markets are working through forward expectations. We are now in the first innings of a credit crisis. Countries don't default. Please see Argentina G20. So a couple things to unpack there, right? How could we not be in an inflation crisis if you still have 8% inflation in the United States and you have 10% inflation in Germany and in the UK, and they just announced that they're just going to print more money? That doesn't worry you at all?
Well, here's the thing, right? It's all about your known knowns versus your known unknowns. So markets need to anticipate. If they have clarity on future expectations, markets tend to be able to work through that. And it's my opinion, it's only an opinion, that the inflation bogey is out of the bag. It's not good numbers, but the reality is the truth has been exposed and the markets are trying to deal with it. I will say that 8% CPI inflation is not a good number, but at least it's been divulged. And do I think that number goes to, let's say, 12%? And I got to be clear here, using the same metrics that got it to 8%, I don't believe that inflation goes to 12% before it goes to 6%, which means there will be a correction to the downside of inflation, posted inflation, and therefore in expectations can rationalize the information that's been delivered. So it's all about forward expectations, Nico. That is the key. It's not about the numbers they are posting right now. It's about the numbers that they post versus forward expectations. And as simply as I can say it, I think that yields are lower than they should be relative to current inflation, but there is an argument that there's still a deflationary environment to come forward. One of the most important things that people are overlooking is really the growth of humans on the planet and how our declining growth or birth rate will impact inflation expectations and actual deflation going forward. So there's a confluence of short-term impacts versus reality of long-term trends, like the one baby per family in China. This takes a long time to work itself through the system so that global growth, which could be measured by human population, is actually on a decline, which will lead to long-term disinflation. Don't want to get too confusing for everybody. Remember, we are at 8%. That is a posted number. Okay, it's not a good number, but at least it's posted, and the market is trying to figure out how to deal with that. What hasn't been posted, the second part of my tweet, is the concerns over the credit contagion. We haven't had that blow up of a big bank yet. That's what I'm concerned about.
So I think the word on the street is Credit Suisse. So is that rumors? Do you believe it? I think you mentioned something about your wife asking you over the weekend or something. I
get a lot of good feedback. I send out, I shit post a little bit. Let's be honest, all right? Like, I try and poke the lion. It's the way I operate. Like, so let's be clear. My wife doesn't worry about contagion of Suisse. I'll be very about that. But the truth is, there is contagion impact in Canada of an eventual potential fault of a systematically important financial institution. That's what SIFI stands for. Systemically important financial institution, as deemed by the Bank of National Settlements. So I don't know which one is going to hit the wall or hit your windshield like a bug hitting your windshield. It happens all the time. It is the catalyst that causes credit contagion that reverberates through the financial system and eventually up to the sovereign debt level. I'm not forecasting the eventual demise of Credit Suisse, but I will tell you the market is, because all I need to do is look at a credit default swap obligation on Credit Suisse. Okay, lots of acronyms here. A CDS contract on Credit Suisse, and the cost of insurance has risen to levels never before seen, higher levels than during the great financial crisis. And if you just take what that means in layman's terms, it means that the cost to Credit Suisse to raise money, to bring money into the banking system, has the US 5-year rate. Let's take 4% and add on another almost 4% for credit risk for the bank called Credit Suisse. 4% plus 4%, their cost of funds is 8% before they've even made a loan. How many loans do you think are profitable that they can add an incremental loan spread on top of their cost of funds without taking excessive amounts of risk, i.e. lending to zombie companies, and then it becomes circular. So when your cost of funds is 8% and the really good loans out there are at 6%, you're not making those loans. Why? Because you can't borrow at 8% and lend at 6%. You're going to lose 2% on your money. That's what it is. A bank takes money in at a cost of funds and reloans it and takes out the VIG, the spread. Okay? Understand, if their cost of funds is excessive, they have to forego a very important part of the lending market, the low risk part, which means they're lending to higher risk companies, which just causes the circularity. I know you say you weren't involved in this business in school, But just imagine that when you deposit money into a bank, you're really lending your money to a bank, and they turn around and take your loan and re-lend it at a higher rate and make that spread. And that's how the bank makes money. Pretty cool, isn't it? Until it goes kaboom. Because people say, guess what? The loans you've made are silly, risk adjusted loans. They're going to default, and therefore it's going to cause the whole system to collapse. Over to you. I know I've given you a lot to think about, but just think of a bank as taking money in, relending it at a spread, and trying to capture that spread with no default losses. Works well on paper until there's default losses, very simply.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but that sounds like a Ponzi, number one. And number two, Greg, what happens, again, theoretical, we don't know the future, right? But what happens if Credit Suisse goes down? Is it going to be a similar, because I do know this.
This is a big concern.
Is it going to be similar to 2008, or it's a contagion, right? It starts spreading and it starts happening to other financial institutions. And if that is the case, if that's the case, why is it a contagion? Why does what happened to Credit Suisse affect other bigger financial institutions?
Well, you nailed it. It's because all these financial institutions are intertwined, right? They have swap agreements with one another. They have, and when I say swap agreements, interest rate swaps where they swap fixed for floating interest rate obligations. They have foreign exchange obligations with each other. They have interbank lending obligations. Some of these are for very short terms, and some of them are for longer terms that you can't just say, oh, we're gonna take these off the books. It's a contract. You can't take them off the books at your own volition. So given that the banking system is so intertwined, where you have counterparty risk exposure over derivatives, over interbank funding or the cash funding, over all sorts of repo agreements and all of these intricate financial products, when one of the counterparties in the system, imagine a system like a bunch of gears, when one of these gears collapses, all of the other gears stop working because their counterparty risk now reverts back to them. Imagine if you, in the great financial crisis, you were Goldman Sachs. This actually happened. Goldman Sachs laid off a bunch of the risk from Goldman Sachs clients. They laid off a bunch of risks with this company called AIG. Now, AIG was a AAA rated insurance company that got way too far over their skis in selling insurance to the Goldman Sachs of the world, to the point where AIG was absolutely insolvent. And the Fed had to bail out AIG, not because they really liked AIG that much, but really because they liked Goldman Sachs that much that they knew that if they let AIG fail, Goldman Sachs would fail as well because of the counterparty risk exposure back to Goldman Sachs. It's not really that crazy to understand how this works, given that Hank Paulson used to work at Goldman Sachs. Hank Paulson was the treasury guy in the great financial crisis. All right. All of this is the Wall Street internal workings of the machine. And when one of the gears of the machine cracks up, all the other gears stop working. I hope that explains it in terms of a contagion impact.
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. And Jack was actually, and I'm going to pull up a comment. Jack is actually thinking what I'm thinking, right? It says, Greg, what if a pivot comes and does not work?
Okay.
That is precisely what happens with drug addicts. Tell us about that world. So, and then I'm going to add to my kind of train of thought with this, right? About the Fed bailout specifically. And that's what you mentioned, right? And I think Jack kind of hit the nail on the head, right? So let's say we find ourselves.
Yeah, I like Jack. Jack's a great guy.
I think
Jack's a very smart man. All right. And Well, yes,
So
because he's got experience. Okay, like we didn't just fall off the turnip truck, right? Like this is the problem with the situation is a lot of the young guys, young guns, don't understand the experience that happens within financial markets. So if I am concerned with the Fed's actions right now. I understand their desire to fight inflation, but I don't think they are looking into the financial markets astutely enough to see the damage they are causing to the plumbing of the financial markets. So they want to raise rates to fight inflation. I get it. But are they looking correctly at the stability of the financial system? And are they pushing too hard on the brakes over here such that the stability of the financial system over here is going to be a train wreck, right? They hit the brakes, the engine hits, and all the cars crash, 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 the train cars. This is what happens when you have a Fed that is managed by a chairman that has never sat in a risk chair. So the question from Jack was, what if the pivot comes and it does not work? Wow. I don't really know what to say about that, except that I would prefer to see the pivot come. And I'm going to define the pivot as this very simply. I don't need them to start lowering interest rates. I just need them to stop accelerating or increasing the rate of Fed funds at a pace that they have never experienced in the world. In the history of a central bank, we have never experienced this degree of acceleration of Fed funds. I would prefer that they just stay and say, okay, we're at 3.25%. We've brought it from 0.25%. We've brought it very quickly to 3.25%. I hope that they stop, take a breath, and evaluate the damage and destruction they've done in the market rather than continue to their target, which is 4.5% to 5%. Well, look, the world is already breaking, in my opinion, at 3.25%. I would prefer them not to do another 75 basis points and then say, well, we'll reevaluate the situation. Guys, you got to see what's happening in the financial plumbing of the system and realize that it's getting blocked up. So my advice would be, if they pivot, how do they define the pivot? I would define the pivot as saying, let's take our foot off the brake. Okay. Let's just see what happens at 3.25. And if it doesn't work, meaning we've taken our foot off the brake, we're going to let the drug addict have a little bit more of its heroin, but still the drug addict is like suffering from withdrawal. My preferred path for the stability of civilization is to live with a greater degree of inflation and the drug addict is still functioning, rather than saying, hey, Mr. Drug Addict, we're sending you into rehab and the whole world economy disintegrates. That is the two outcomes that we have. A form of a pivot, A, or absolute global depression, B. I don't care as a Bitcoiner what the result is, because all paths lead to Bitcoin. What I do care about is the stability of the world in both scenarios. And my personal opinion is the world can live with some enhanced inflation. What we can't live with is global depression and anarchy and absolute disintegration of social order. Those are the two choices. I prefer the former, not the latter.
So a lot to unpack there. But Greg, I kind of understand, and what you said about Powell is fascinating, because I believe he's a lawyer. I don't even think he was in finance. I think that's his background. But I know this, right? Inflation is one of the most damaging things politically. Who's ever in power tends to be voted out, very quickly if inflation is high. the example that I'm going to give, last time this happened in the United States was during the Carter administration. And then that's what led to the, the so-called Reagan revolution, Ronald Reagan getting elected, right? But Ronald Reagan still had to kind of endure something very similar. And I think Volcker was the head of the Fed at the time. And he actually took a lot of punishment politically. What is the difference here, Greg? And again, like, fine, let's say we endure inflation, but isn't that just going to exacerbate the problem, right? Because at the end of the day, who benefits from inflation? It's anyone who holds assets. It's the government, of course, right? But anyone in the middle and lower classes that save and earn in fiat, they get absolutely crushed. So isn't that just going to exacerbate the problem that you find in the United States today, which is the huge gaps in wealth inequality? What is your response to that? Do you think that Powell has the, excuse my language, cojones to follow Volcker, what he did?
Yes, great question, Nico. This is a question from somebody who's, you said you hadn't studied it in school, and perhaps that's a great thing, because people who do study it tend to be brainwashed by the Keynesian, well, let's call it Keynesian brainwashing. Okay, so they get brainwashed by the Keynesian policies. Here's what I don't know the outcome in either scenario. It's just my belief that the outcome in an inflation scenario is more drawn out and less disturbing than the outcome in a global depression scenario, which could be followed by global war. Okay, I don't believe the first one leads to global war. I do believe the second one, global depression, could lead to global war. And there are the risks that I tend to evaluate between the two. And why cannot Jerome Powell be Chairman Paul Volcker of the 1980s? And incidentally, that's when I started my career trading, was in the 1980s with Paul Volcker. Very simply, and I see this note here from Bunny, very simply because the US debt situation today is about 4 times worse than it was when Paul Volcker was chairman of the Fed, which is to say, when Volcker was chairman of the Fed trying to fight the inflation boogeyman, total debt to GDP was 30%. Now, today, Jerome Powell is trying to fight the same battle when debt to GDP is 4 times as high, which is to say it's at 120%. It's a diametrically different challenge for Powell versus Volcker. In fact, I'll invoke my grade 11 math example here. It's impossible for Powell to do it given the debt spiral situation that the USA is in. He can pretend he wants to be like Volcker, and I'll just pull out my math and say, hey, stupid, listen to me. You cannot fight the same battle because you've accumulated a debt burden that is vastly different from your predecessor. So give your head a shake, you fucking moron, okay? And listen, you cannot do it with the same tools. You will only cause global depression. It's called a debt spiral. Wake the fuck up, you stupid lawyer. Sorry.
No, I think you said it perfectly. I think we're all very frustrated by the actions of our so-called betters or leaders. They're acting like clowns, like that's for sure. So you said something very interesting, Greg. I'm going to ask you, right? You said global depression could potentially lead to global war. Why does it end in global war? And wouldn't you say this time is different due to the advent of nuclear weapons, right? When, the whole theory of mutually assured destruction. So does it have to lead to global war? And why does a global war happen in the first place?
Okay, so I'll answer your second question first. Does a global war happen? Because the only way you can conquer your own poverty is to take over another nation and plunder them to the benefit of your own citizens. Okay. And the second part of your question is the nuclearization. Well, you started with weapons that move from a machine gun to the Gatling gun to some other extremely powerful guns. This is just another augmentation of the arsenal. I don't believe it means they don't do it, even if it means mutually assured destruction. I don't want to get in there. I am not a military strategist, and I don't even want to think that the possibility of that, Nico, purely because it's just such an god-awful outcome. I would hope that the chairman of the Federal Reserve sits back and said, I'm going to change my inflation target from 2% annualized. Just throwing a number out there for you people. How about if we live with 4% annualized versus nuclear destruction? Tell me which one you'd rather have. It's that simple.
Yeah. Do you think this was avoidable? Do you think that they, from my perspective as a Bitcoiner, they printed an ungodly amount of money due to the thing that can't be said on YouTube, the pandemic, I'll say that. And another component, right, is this: they bought into the modern monetary Kool-Aid, which I think is an absurd idea.
Yeah.
So do you think that this whole crisis that we find ourselves in today could have been avoided if governments just did nothing as a reaction to the pandemic?
I will say that the MMT people are god-awful mathematicians, and Stephanie Kelton should be fired. First of all, she should be fired for incompetence. Then I could take it to a next step and say, there's a level of absolute there's a level of concern that I could not live with myself if I had given that advice to a nation. And if she's able to live with herself with the advice she gave to a nation flippantly, and so be it. She's a selfish individual. I don't have the same DNA makeup as she does. And she did it so she could get a title of a book. The book was based on false facts. It was based on elementary thinking. It was absolutely disgraceful from an economics analysis perspective. She's destroying the life of our children. And I just have to call her out on that. And all you MMTers out there that believe she had the hopium, well, fuck you, stupid fucks, okay? She was wrong. She was wrong from day one. If you want to listen to an ill-advised armchair academic who has never sat in a true risk chair so that she can advise where the world should go, well, I guess we get what we deserve listening to that drivel. It was an absolute academic exercise with zero experience sitting in a risk chair. That's all I can say. It's the difference between something that should work on a formula on a blackboard versus the reality of living in a risk chair where the dynamics of pricing a market change instantaneously, not over the life of, and chapter 4, we're going to deal with this. Too many armchair academics in positions of power right now. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunate, and you see this a lot in academia. And, I feel like I personally missed that whole garbage because I just skipped it altogether. And I find myself a lot thinking, I'm like, just pure common sense from, just learning things on the ground, I think puts me in a Naval, I think, has one of the best quotes, right? It's like, if you get into higher education, you lose your mind or something like that, like you get the academia, but you lose the common sense or something. Is that a price that people should be willing to pay anyways?
How about Nico? I think there's, yeah, but can I just say this in defense of a lot of really good professors?
Sure.
There are a lot of real out there. A shout out to my alma mater and David Collum at Cornell University. Okay. He is the example of a professor that tries to examine a situation and adjust his thesis as the information changes. versus some knucklehead like Kelton, again, that wrote a book and then is going to stick to that thesis, sort of like Shifty Pete sticks to his thesis and Paul Krugman sticks to his thesis that, you know, the impact of the internet is going to be somewhere around the level of a fax machine. What an absolute embarrassment. Like Paul Krugman, seriously, for the benefit of the future children of this world, just go away and hide in some little closet, you fucking failed academic, okay? You are an embarrassment to risk management globally. And just because you can write in the New York Times, which I wouldn't wrap fish in the New York Times as a publication because they're so conflicted, but go and write your little shit in the New York Times because you see a world that you've never actually managed. You only do it on a blackboard in front of a bunch of students. If I was from Princeton University, I had a degree from Princeton University, and Krugman was still an endowed professor at Princeton, I would rip that piece of shit up because it's an embarrassment, his analysis.
Yeah, no, we've made fun of Krugman plenty, and he's also a Bitcoin detractor. Speaking of Bitcoin, so Greg, it sounds like history is repeating itself. And you look at history, it sounds like the same mistakes were just forgotten over time, and it looks like, you know, humanity believes, in this case, once again, we could just print money out of nothing and everything will be all right. And then the consequences of that, whether, you know, it's the moral decay of society, you know, everyone says the hidden tax of inflation, things get cheaper, they don't last as long. There's the famous example of the refrigerator that if you bought in 1950, that thing's still working today. And if you buy like a brand new Samsung refrigerator, that thing won't last 2 years. So that being said, we're clearly going through a cycle. Some people buy into the fourth turning theory. Where does Bitcoin fit in all this? Is Bitcoin positioned? Did it come in a time where we could finally break that cycle in humanity and we could just go on to a sound money standard? And the problem is that every time humanity goes onto a sound money standard, they start cutting corners a little bit, right? We get on a gold standard. You know, the founding fathers learned this the hard way in the United States. And there's a lot of famous quotes by, you know, George Washington talking about how terrible fiat money is. It's because they experienced it themselves, right? So do you believe, it's a two-pronged question, is Bitcoin going to break that cycle, and are governments going to allow that cycle to be broken? Because as Lawrence so beautifully said about last week, he said that that they would love to keep the privilege of being able to create a money for free that everybody else has to work for, and the tremendous amount of power from having that privilege as well. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, firstly, a shout out to my friend Larry Lepard. You know, he is a great thinker. He like me, we had the benefit. I will still not trade in my education at Cornell University because I actually thought I got my money's worth, and I probably think, and I can't speak for him, but Lawrence got his money's worth at Harvard in the time that we schooled ourselves. When I say schooled ourselves, chose to go to the schools. The question about Bitcoin breaking the cycle, here's what I've said before, and I hope that you will appreciate this. When I graduated from Cornell, I was lucky enough to get a job back in Canada. I could have worked on Wall Street. I decided to stay in or return to Canada to work at Canada's largest financial institution. And the Royal Bank of Canada was actually technically insolvent at that time because of its Latin American debt exposure. Okay. And very simply, in the late 1980s, because all global banks had lent too much money in US dollars, they'd lent too much money to third world or developing nations. And those US dollar loans could not be paid back because a US dollar, strengthening US dollar, caused those loan obligations to be so excessive that they couldn't pay them back, i.e. queue up the same situation that we have today, 35 years later. In 1988, my first job right out of Cornell, I went to the CFO and I said, oh my God, we have a problem here. The Royal Bank of Canada, Canada's largest bank, is insolvent, which is to say, if we had marked down the value of the loans we'd made to these countries to the trading price of the loans in the secondary market, the loan losses, which would have come out of our book value of equity, would have caused the book value of equity to go below zero. Holy moly, Nico. I had spent 6 years going to school, studying the fiat system, and they never told me. They have never told me that financial institutions are regularly insolvent as a function of the economic cycle. Why? Because they use so much leverage. So will Bitcoin, coming back to your first question, will Bitcoin break the cycle? Bitcoin can help level the cycle, okay? So the cycle goes like this. Can Bitcoin level the highs and the lows? Yes, in my opinion. Will it fix it? That is to be determined. So I hope you appreciate, I don't have 100% clarity on this, but I do know that Bitcoin can help the stupidity of the fiat cycle that causes banks to be regularly insolvent. Okay, so that's a good thing. Yes, Bitcoin can help. Will it fix it? Hard to say, but it's our best chance. I don't see any other tool that will help fix the system like Bitcoin can fix. Then the second part of your question, so Bitcoin's the only solution that I see right now. Is it gonna fix it? Dang, I don't know, but it's where all my hope goes because there's nothing left. There's no other part of the system that can fix the fiat Ponzi. The second part of your question, will governments allow Bitcoin to succeed? And I'm going to come out very clearly and say there will be governments that embrace Bitcoin and governments that resist Bitcoin. And the governments that embrace Bitcoin, in my opinion, will be the winners. And the governments that resist Bitcoin will play their paths to destruction. So, very smart young man out of Boston, Jason Lowry, friend of mine. I've met him in person, who's working for the US Space Force. I think he could be the smartest guy I've met in the Bitcoin community so far. And that's not to say or to detract from the likes of a Jeff Booth or James Lavish or Larry Lepard. All of these guys are brilliant. And I will say, if I'm the smartest guy in the room ever, go find another room, okay? I'm going to look for another room because I better not be the smartest guy in the room. If I'm the smartest guy in the room, we're in big trouble. All I do is try and tell the truth and take the information that I lucky enough to decipher from these very smart other people. So Jason Lowry thinks that there's governments that will embrace Bitcoin. They will be the winners. And if we can't convince the most freedom-loving government of the world, which still is the United States of America, if we can't convince them that Bitcoin is freedom and Bitcoin is hope, well, the other countries that do embrace Bitcoin will flip in the world order, and the days of the USA as being, the guiding light for everyone else in the world, well, sorry, you lost your status. And unfortunately, that typically happens around every 100 years. And it's been about 100 years since the USA has been, the global reserve currency. So if you go by statistics, there should be a flippening. I don't want that to be the case. And by the way, you guys know I live in Canada, right? So I live in Canada, and I'm pitching for the USA because Canada's a rounding error. Like, just sweep Canada off the edge of the desk. We do not matter. Even though we are a G7 country, which means we are in the top 7 economies of the world, we're still not bigger than California. California is a bigger economy than Canada. So I want the USA to succeed, okay? I've gone to school there. You guys know that. I love freedom. You guys know that. I believe the USA is still the last remaining bastion of freedom in the world. I want the USA to adopt Bitcoin. Is it possible that they, well, yeah, I'd say it's even more likely that they don't than they do. But the people that think they should is growing all the time. You have DeSantis, you have Cynthia Lummis, you have all these politicians in the USA that understand the advantages of sound money. Not to mention smart money managers like Larry Lepard, who's pitching it to his clients. And even it's like, you know, you got to chip away at this over time. So I want you guys to understand that even though I'm Canadian, I'm absolutely rooting for the United States, because if the USA fails, Canada doesn't have a chance. That's absolutely true. And if Canada fails, well, the USA still has a chance, but the chance is lessened because Canada is the USA's first or second largest trading partner, defined, you know, it used to be easily the number 1 trading partner. Now there's different ways of measuring it. The point is, Canada lives rent-free in your attic, okay? We're a beautiful nation, 5,000 kilometers long and a couple of 100 kilometers wide like a ribbon. We're living in your attic rent-free, but we still are your most important trading partner. And if we fuck up, well, it's going to have trickle-down effects to you guys. There's going to be blood coming down the walls from your attic. You guys may not care, and you can brush off the blood off the walls. It still will leave a stain, okay? We want to do this together. We absolutely need to do this together, but it has to be led out of the United States of America. So that's why I want to do everything I can to help educate people to understand the beauty of this solution. Fiat money is a disease, and you got to cleanse the system of this disease, but you can't do it overnight. It's a process. It's a process where Jeff Booths of the world get out there and educate. The Larry Lepards get out there and educate. The DeSantis, Cynthia Lummis, they get up into the upper echelons of government and they educate. So please educate, educate, educate. It is the only solution. So I hope I answered both your questions there. Bitcoin's the only solution I see. Does it mean that it will succeed? No. But we better damn well try it because there's no other alternative. And then secondly, can governments put their thumb in the eye? Yeah, governments do that shit all the time. That's why we need to ensure that there are smart people on, Capitol Hill that will fight for freedom and hope, i.e. Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And being an immigrant myself, first generation American, you get pitched that idea, the American dream. It's very beautiful, and I think a lot of people don't really appreciate that. If they've been an American citizen for a long time, they don't really understand that 99% of the world doesn't have the freedoms we have here. So I agree with that. Now, Ray Dalio, which recently stepped down from Bridgewater, he had a very interesting theory. He actually wrote a book about it called The Changing World Order, and he was basically making the case that exactly what you mentioned earlier, right? That the U.S. potentially could be on a decline, and the rising world power is China, right? And we all know what China wants. China wants the central bank digital currency model. And I think it's a terrible mistake by the U.S. government pursuing that rather than pursuing Bitcoin. But in the process of pursuing Bitcoin, the government's going to have to give up power that it normally would enjoy, having being the head honcho of the money. So, what are your thoughts on that theory? Do you believe Ray Dalio is correct, or do you think that Bitcoin changes that completely? Because his theory is based on the world leader, the country that leads the world issues or is the head of the world reserve currency at the time. So it went from Great Britain, they lost it due to World War I or World War II, then it went to United States, and now he's making the theory that it's China stepping up the plate. From my perspective, I believe that yes, the US could potentially lose power of global reserve currency, but through the dollar, but it could still remain in the lead if it embraces Bitcoin. But in the process of embracing Bitcoin, it loses that privilege, or specifically the United States government loses that privilege of creating money out of thin air. So what are your thoughts on that theory? Do you agree with it? What are your thoughts on Ray Dalio in the first place?
Well, firstly, for Ray Dalio, congratulations on an incredible career, sir. You successfully milked the fiat system to its absolute end. You're going out on top. You had a plus 30% year last year, and you just fucked the system perfectly, okay? So great job, Ray Dalio. You fucked the system better than any of us fiat traders have ever fucked the system. So congrats. Now, if you don't see the lunacy of your projections, it means you and I hate to say it, Chinese wife want the Chinese business model to succeed. I'm going to take the other side of that trade, okay? Ray Dalio understands the debt spiral that the USA is in. It's only grade 11 mathematics. He laid it out very clearly in his book, in his writings. Yeah, it's not that difficult. So, but I will tip my cap to you, sir, because you and I see the debt spiral the same way. And he actually believes in Bitcoin, but he hasn't allocated Bridgewater to Bitcoin because Bitcoin is too small of an asset class as it is right now. Okay. So at the end of the day, there will be people who are smaller than Bridgewater that can take a position in Bitcoin to be a meaningful position with respect to their portfolio. They same math and realize that spiral, DEBT spiral, is only grade 11 math, and there's ways of solving that. There is a way of solving that debt spiral where Bitcoin becomes your savings account and your fiat currency checking account. Fiat currencies in and of themselves are not a bad thing. They facilitate global trade. They're not good as a savings mechanism, but they are good as a mechanism to avoid barter. Okay. And Ray lays this out beautifully in his book. And it's like he knows the solution is Bitcoin. He just can't put it on paper because he'd probably get, I don't know, eliminated. Let's just say eliminated by the US system because the biggest hedge fund in the world is seen as endorsing Bitcoin. The only solution. So there's lots of little, machinations that come in here. But the fact of the matter is, he played the fiat Ponzi perfectly. He played it like a fiddle. He played interest rates when they went from 14% to down to under 1% in the US 10-year. Then he reversed course and he started shorting the same bonds that he was buying all the way down when the rest of the world was too silly to understand what a negative yield on bonds means. And he just said, well, the rest of the world's a knucklehead and I'm going to fill their boots. And that's when you get a plus 30% up here. So once again, sir, you played it like a fiddle. I could not have even come close to succeeding to the level you have succeeded. But if you can sleep at night because of your ability to sit back and absolutely destroy people's savings because of your force, your ability to use leverage to fleece the system, all right, sleep at night. You're a conflicted fucking fool, okay? If you have children, you should be ashamed of your performance. I have 3 kids. I care about my children's future. This is why I want Bitcoin to succeed. Because fat white guys like me and you, Ray Dalio, fat white old guys like you have pulled forward gains at the expense of our children. You should be ashamed of yourself. Taking the benefits of your children for self-fulfillment in the here and now. I'm speaking out against this. Do you have the backbone to do the same? If you don't, you're a fucking loser, sir. Please send this directly to Ray Dalio's email. You are a shameful fucking loser. Sorry, I can't say it any other way.
Thank you, Greg. I feel the same way. So another thing, you mentioned it, and you mentioned it earlier, right? There is no other tool that can fix the fiat Ponzi. Why is Bitcoin the solution to this? If Bitcoin was, the global reserve currency, or if Bitcoin was being used, right? Why couldn't people like Ray Dalio do what he did in the fiat system?
Okay, we have to be careful because Ray Dalio started his, which called risk parity, way before Bitcoin was conceived. Okay, and Ray Dalio's strategy worked very well with all the available tools that were, that lived at the time. Bitcoin was invented, or not even invented, I believe it was discovered 13 years ago. And it's grown to an asset size right now of slightly more than $350 billion. But to understand how insignificant that asset size is to a levered hedge fund like Bridgewater, it's not surprising that he can't use that tool. It's just too small. If he got into Bitcoin in any sort of size, he would dominate the market. And he can't manage his risk that way. So I'm not blaming Mr. Dalio for not embracing Bitcoin over the history of his hedge fund. What I am blaming Mr. Dalio for is not coming out and saying that Bitcoin is the solution to the Ponzi that he made all his money on between 1990 and 2020. He knows the answer. He wrote a book on it. But there's certain people that are pulling his strings that say, well, Ray, come on. The fiat system is your lifeblood. You can't stab us in the heart after you've made a career on the fiat system. And perhaps that's sinking in. I'm just voicing my opinion that if he had a backbone, he would tell the truth. And I guess maybe as a naive Canadian, I would assume that there's a lot of people up here in Canada that would actually tell the truth. I would hope that there's that many in the United States that would tell the truth. I don't know if a lot of them live on Wall Street, but there's guys like Larry Lepard, who lives in Boston, that would tell the truth. Okay, so man, oh man, this is not easy for me to say this because I was in a somewhat similar position to Mr. Dalio. I never was nearly as successful as he was, but I did okay. I'm trying to make amends. I want this system to succeed because I believe it will ensure the continuity of the freedom of the United States for the generations of my children and my grandchildren. I don't hear him talking that way that often. He's looking in the rearview mirror. I prefer to look out the windshield and try and plan for a future for my kids. Jeff Booth is exactly the same way. Okay, we're trying to design a system that is beneficial regardless of class, the Cantillon effect, whatever you want to call it. It allows everybody in the world an equal shot at a store of value that is colorblind. It's, it is beautiful. It's agnostic to some of the real problems that we have in our social society right now. So it's not easy, Nico. You know it, right? I mean, I'm just very happy to be part of this community that's a bunch of do-gooders, okay? We're doing good by doing well. And Wall Street's not like that at all. I've worked on Wall Street for 30 years of my life. Wall Street is 99% takers. The Bitcoin community is 85% givers. That's a diametrically opposed community. I'm going with the givers. Okay? I want the givers to win because hope over evil. I want people to be given a fair shot regardless of where they started their lives. You don't have to be a silver spooner to succeed. You can succeed at the bottom of the privilege level, and that's an efficient market. And Bitcoin is my best measuring stick on an efficient market like that, a fair market. Thank you for that. I'm trying to speak the truth. Again, I have 3 kids, people. Like, I'm fine. I don't need people to, I've done what I need to do, but I need to do this for my children. I need to do it for your children. I need to, the selfish Wall Street fucks that are doing it for themselves, I need to call them out and start thinking about the children. For the kids, that's my tagline. Thank you.
I appreciate that. This one of the main motivations, one of the main messages of Simply, is people don't understand, but I think you hit the nail on the head. My generation, specifically the millennial generation, the Zoomer generation, we don't own anything. We're no more than Russian serfs. It's completely different than the generations that came before us. I don't have another option. Like, Bitcoin is my way. Bitcoin's my only hope for a better future. Without Bitcoin, personally, I would not be where I am today. And I've seen that story play out so many times. Opti's, being so kind, sitting on the floor right now, producing. And same thing. I've heard that story happen over and over again. We're hearing that story play out on a national level with the country of El Salvador. Look at the wonders it's done there. It's only been legal tender for a year and a half. So I agree.
1 year.
And, people like yourself, Greg, like, it's what you said. And Jeff is the same, right? You don't need to be here. You don't need to do this. I need to be here. I don't have a choice. There is no choice for me. It's either Bitcoin or slavery. We've said that many times on the show. But I want to end the show because we're coming up on the hour mark. So we got like 15 minutes left or so. I want to turn it a little bit bullish. And I want to confirm one of your tweets. And I want you guys to pay attention to the date. Right. Sorry. In this view, it doesn't show the date. So let me zoom out. So the date says here it's May 19, 2021. And you say, hey, world investors, global debt is a US $400 trillion asset that is programmed to debase. Bitcoin is a sub $1 trillion asset that is programmed as the most secure store of value ever created. Now, this was before this crazy news that a lot of people weren't paying attention to, but BlackRock, which either has 18 trillion or 11 trillion dollars under assets, I forget which one, announced that 11. It was going to offer. There we go. Announced that it was going to offer Bitcoin to its institutional clients. So, Greg, is this your prediction playing out? And I just want to add, you said this a year before BlackRock even said anything. And on top of BlackRock, it's also Fidelity that is jumping in as well. Right. So is this happening? Is this what you're talking about? Are you finally seeing the institutional interest? It's also very curious, too, is because they waited for a 70% downturn before they threw their gloves in the ring.
Well, okay. So thank you for pointing at that tweet. Yes, in a nutshell, happening. And I need to reverse the order that you laid it out. BlackRock's not doing it of their own volition. BlackRock is doing it as number 1 asset allocator in the world. BlackRock is doing it because the number 5 asset allocator in the world, Fidelity, has been studying Bitcoin for over 5 years. Okay. Actually, Fidelity started mining Bitcoin in something like 2015 as an experiment to understand this beautiful technology. So if you're number 1, and remember, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, number 1, was against Bitcoin categorically, but Fidelity didn't care. And they kept studying it, and they kept offering it to their clients, or started offering it to their clients, to the point where BlackRock, which competes against number 5, said, oh boy, we're going to lose clients to the competition if we don't offer Bitcoin as well. So I don't believe BlackRock embraced it like Fidelity. I believe BlackRock had to, out of fear of competitive disadvantage. If they weren't offering it, their clients would go to Fidelity because they wanted to get exposure to Bitcoin. So yes, my thesis is playing out. Now, just 1 year ago, doesn't make a victory lap. Okay. I'm playing this over the long run. And I noticed a couple of, I love your comments here in the side. You have heard me talk before because someone said 900 trillion is the total addressable market. And I agree with that. So if Bitcoin is less than 1 trillion, thank you, Delta One, the total addressable market for Bitcoin is 900 trillion US dollars. That includes 400 trillion of debt, which I mentioned in that tweet. Below that is 300 trillion of real estate. Below that, 100 trillion of global equities. So we're up to 800 trillion. And below that is 100 trillion of other assets, including gold. Yeah, you know, that little thing that Shifty Pete is so excited about, but has never worked properly. All right, you got 10 trillion of gold, you got currencies, commodities, everything else is another 100 trillion. In total, 400 plus 300 plus 100 plus 100 is 900 trillion US dollars, total addressable market. Beautiful. If Bitcoin gets 5% of that, let's run some quick math. 5% of 900 trillion in today's dollars, 45 trillion. 45 trillion divided by 21 million. Whoa, we're over $2 million US per Bitcoin in today's dollars. I don't know. I've never seen a better asymmetric trade in my life than the opportunity to own Bitcoin. I got involved in Bitcoin in 2016. I will tell you, from a risk manager with 30 plus years of experience, Bitcoin is a better risk-adjusted trade today than it was in 2016. And the question would be why? And I would say simply, it's operated flawlessly for the last 5 years, from 2016, or 6 years now, 2016 to 2022. More importantly, though, it was the government response to COVID where they printed another $30 trillion of money out of thin air. All right? Like, people, do the math. This is so simple. If you own 0 Bitcoin, you are exposing yourself to far more portfolio risk than if you own, and here's where I come, 2 to 5% of your portfolio. That's all I'm asking everybody in the world, to own 2 to 5% of their portfolios, net worth, in Bitcoin. Why? Because it's insurance on the fiat Ponzi. And the reality is, there's a lot of people that we interact with that say, Foss, you're such a bear. Why wouldn't you own more? No, I do own more. I'm just telling people that don't own any, you got to get to 2 to 5% to protect your future wealth for your children. That's all I'm saying. And on the other side of the spectrum, if you have people that say they have to be 100% allocated to Bitcoin, look, I don't manage risk the same way. But the point is, my allocation, or even a 5% allocation, if it goes up 100-fold, which I think it could, again, trading at 20,000, I think it could go over 2 million. That's 100 times. Okay, 100 times upside. If you own 5% of your portfolio in something that goes 100 times higher, damn, you're talking real money. You're talking real wealth generation. The problem is, most people will not take the advice now because they're going to say, oh, I'm going to wait for it to trade down to 14,000 because I'm so smart. And then if it does hit 14,000, they'll be like, oh boy, I better not buy it now because the price is going down. People, understand, this is a 20-year trade and investment. This is your insurance on your future. If you don't get it, I don't have any more time to spend with you. Don't manage your own money. You're too fucking stupid to do it. Give it to a professional like BlackRock. BlackRock at least understands the benefits of diversification and portfolio diversification. Bonds have lost their spot in the sun very simply. Is it surprising that Ray Dalio is riding off into the sunset right now? In my opinion, not at all. Good on you, sir. You milked the system. Now what are you going to do? Why don't you do something worthwhile for your life, Ray? Why don't you get involved in Bitcoin for the benefit of the future of the children of the United States? You lazy fuck. Signed, Greg Foss, XOX from Canada. Thanks.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think 5%, even 1%, if it 100x's, like you say, like I believe also, I'm even more bullish than that. But of course, I'm Nico. Okay, so Greg, even 1%, if it does 100x, that will outperform the 99% other of your portfolio. It will just annihilate it. Even if the 99% goes to zero, that 1% will make up for all the losses.
Well,
no problem.
Let's be careful. Here's the funny thing, Nico, because you get people to own 5%, and I've seen it, and they own 5%, and then they forget about the other 95% that they own, and they're just focused on this 5%. And I'm like, dude, guys, come on. I told you to own this, and we'll talk in 20 years. I'm not asking you to own it for the next 20 days because you're going to flip it back into this worthless fiat stuff. I want you to own it as your insurance policy over the next 20 years. And so I'm pretty good at shutting off these people. I'm like, guys, if you're focused on this 5% of your portfolio, but the 95% of your portfolio is down 60%, and you're worried about this Bitcoin thing that's down a little bit from the all-time highs, you're failing math. You're failing risk analysis. So sometimes you just got to tune them out, right, Nico? You got to say, look, you're too stupid to manage your own money. You've proven it to me. So God has a way of dealing with people like you. Like you just, it's the survival of the fit not going to make it. So I hate to be that crass because I want all people to be able to survive, obviously. But emotions are the worst enemy to proper risk allocation. We should all be very thankful that the price of Bitcoin has come down so that more people who don't have the ability to acquire it or significant amounts at least invest dollars, right? More Bitcoin than they could when the price was, say, 3.5 higher. It's not that difficult. I just hate people and the narrative of people like the stalwart. You know, that fucking dink Joe Weisenthal out there who was bitching on Bitcoin when it was at $320 US per Bitcoin. And he was gloating, oh, it's over, it's over. Man, oh man, those poor people that listen to that conflicted donkey, okay? Joe Weisenthal is a conflicted donkey. Yeah, block me again, Joe. I sent him my research paper. We had a conversation. He didn't even have the dignity to respond to the paper that I sent him about managing risk, okay? Donkeys like Joe Weisenthal on Wall Street are the reason we are in the problems we are in. XOX Joe Weisenthal, if you had half a spine, get me on your show to talk truth rather than talking bullshit. I sell Bitcoin at $320, $320. You never hear about that. It's only lagging on it is at $70,000, and it's come back to $20,000 running a victory lap. The guy is a loser. If he had a backbone, let's talk about this like gentlemen. I won't call you a loser to your face until you prove me that you're a loser. Let's take on these Wall Street conflicted people, okay? Thanks.
Amen to that. So final question, and I think this is a perfect segue. I have a buddy that works at Goldman. We're a very similar age, and I see the same thing. The hostility. You mentioned Bitcoin. One of the things that I'll never forget this like burned in my head. Mind you, this was 2017. Okay. And I told him, like, listen, Bitcoin has figured out how to separate the monetary policy out of the hands of humans, right? There's a halving every 4 years. It's set in stone. No one could touch it. It's a great thing. And he looks at me and he's like, Nico, people need monetary policy. And I was just looking at him perplexed. And I've been telling him, 2017, so it's been 5 years. Bitcoin, went from, it was 2017, the beginning of 2017, it was 1,000, right? It hit all the way 69,000. That's a 69x in 5 years. Nothing he offered his. Yeah. Why the hostility? Why are they acting this way, Greg? You were in the belly of the beast. What's going on?
Well, hopefully, Well, hopefully he's still a friend of yours. No, I really don't ever want to lose friendships over Bitcoin, because all I'm trying to do is help educate people. I'm not trying to dominate their lives or whatever. But the employees of Goldman Sachs are paid, I repeat, they are paid not to understand Bitcoin, which is another way of saying they are paid to be a bloodsucker on the fiat system as it exists. So as a bloodsucker, they don't want the fiat system to decompose because their lifeblood is being a bloodsucker on that fiat system. They can't be a bloodsucker on the Bitcoin ecosystem. He may not even realize it because he's pretty young. Nico, I don't know how old you are, but all I would say is when I graduated from my school, I was 25 years old. I did not know shit about fuck, okay? I knew zero. Even though I had this pristine Ivy League degree and I had 4 years of McGill engineering behind it, I knew nothing about how the world really worked. To the defense of your young friend, I understand he wants to be a bloodsucker. That's fine. But he knows nothing about how the real world really works. Over time, he will learn how the world really works. And maybe he'll look back on his experience and say, man, I had this opportunity to make a difference, to participate in an ecosystem that was hope and freedom for the world. But I decided to stay in my white shoes, Goldman Sachs, glass-towered office and be a bloodsucker on the fiat system. I don't know. There's people that break away from that. We have a lot of them in the Bitcoin community. That being said, Bitcoin doesn't care. Bitcoin will survive by the people that embrace it, the people that understand the beauty of the technology. And more importantly, like where I came from, someone asked me, does Foss run a node? You know the crazy thing? We actually do. Foss doesn't run it though. Foss is not smart enough to run a node, but the companies that I'm involved with, 100% we run nodes, okay? But I get smart people to work with me. I'm not smart enough. You guys say it's real simple to operate a node. I can barely operate my iPhone, people. Okay, can you please understand I grew up with a rotary dial phone? Like for me, this iPhone thing is like the most incredible, beautiful technology I've ever seen. But at the end of the day, yes, I do run a node. I am trying to educate myself to the future. I grew up without a personal computer. Why? They didn't fucking exist, okay? Do you guys understand that? When I graduated in 1986 from McGill, there was no such thing as a personal computer for every student. They did exist, but they were too expensive to put in the laps of every person, of every student. So just at the end of the day, understand, I've come from a different generation. I'm trying to figure this shit out. What I do know is the fiat system doesn't work. Hope I can impart that upon you guys. I'm certain that the fiat system is doomed to fail. I do believe Bitcoin is the solution. I need the help of the young, smart plebs who've grown up with an iPhone in their hands since they've been a kid. Because why? Well, it's second, nature for them. I love you guys. All right. I love you guys. Understand that I was around with a rotary dial phone, literally. I know you guys probably don't even know what that is, but that was on our coffee table in my dining room when I was eating dinner with my family when I was like in the 1980s. Okay. Just the way it is. Fight the good fight. Nico, I really love your audience. I look at a lot of these. Thank you for some Renaud Doucette. Merci beaucoup, mon ami. Respect Foss. Look, I just will say I'm fighting this fight because I care. I'm not Ray Dalio. All right. I don't ride out in the sunset with all this fiat money, pack my bags and be a really proud guy because I raped the system. I'm trying to do it a little differently. Ray, there's still a chance for you, sir. Make a legacy that matters for the children, not for your selfish little fucking Bridgewater record. Okay, well done. That was flawed from the. Do something different. difference for the world. Thank you so much.
Wow. I had a great time, Greg. That was quite a rip. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for coming on Simply Bitcoin IRL. I will see you in the flesh at Pacific Bitcoin. And yeah, man, awesome. Really enjoyed that. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, great. My pleasure. Thanks for having me, brother. We'll see you in Pacific Bitcoin.
I'm gonna wrap it up, guys. See you tomorrow.
Thanks, Nico.
Which one's the best crypto asset? Well, Bitcoin's the best crypto asset. Okay. What's the second best? There is no second best.